For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Evolution is the fundamental idea in biology. So you're not going to have a next generation of physicians or people to research vaccines without an understanding of evolution.
He brings up evolution theory when he meant to bring up cell theory. He doesn't even know the difference. Do you want to know what evolution theory has actually brought to medicine? The removal of the gallbladder, thinking that it was worthless and harmful to have. The removal of these vital organs that actually serve a purpose, and they're not vestigial remnants left over. So, let me be clear. Evolutionary theory has caused the death and suffering of an innumerable amount of people. When evolution-indoctrinated scientists failed to discover the purpose for which the appendix was created, for example, their indoctrination led them to illogically conclude that it had little to no physiological function, that it was just an evolutionary leftover, a vestigial organ. Thus began the unnecessary removal of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people's appendixes, as they spread this evolutionary concept to doctors. Now we've learned the valuable immunological role of the appendix. Little did they know back then that it was a backup immune system which produces killer B cells, like the thyroid produces killer T cells. It also plays a replenishing healthy gut bacteria role after sickness, especially after diarrhea. But how many people suffered infections, chronic health problems, and death from compromised immune systems due to this loss of bacteria, vital to our body's defense system, all because of evolutionary dogma? We will never truly know the negative impact, but the numbers are off the charts. Evolution causes far more harm than good. So, Bill Nye, the science guy, you're obviously not the science guy you claim to be, because you don't even have the basic understanding of the difference of theories. First of all, no, it's cell theory. That is the bedrock of biology. Emergence is the universal theme of biology. Evolution is just an extension of that. Just like how any field would branch out, some become dilapidated, useless twigs whose development doesn't benefit anyone. The bedrock of medicine is the germ theory of disease, which is an extension of cell theory, not evolution theory. It is an understanding of the methods of treatment of disease, with a fluid understanding of pathophysiology, anatomy, and internal medicine. This is my specialty, and I write books on it. You have either such a lack of understanding in this area, or you're completely lying about it. You will never see a patient get cured by understanding that they're an ape, or related to a chimpanzee, or whatever you want to scrounge up in the fossil record and say we're related to. That nonsense doesn't belong in biology, where actual observable, testable evidence matters. Just like how it's a doctor's job to treat a patient, it's a biologist's job to use his understanding of cellular life to somehow benefit humanity. What does evolutionary theory have to do with this? Nothing. What does a fossil benefit? How does a society further improve by continuously digging up useless fossils and putting them in museums? When a patient is dying, what are you going to do? Shovel interpretational evidence down their throat? Understanding evolution is only relevant in a few niche fields, and it really just boils down to an understanding of the applicable mechanisms of Mendelian genetics, which was discovered before evolution ever became popularized. Antibiotic resistance takes a paragraph for me to explain, and doesn't require course in phylogenetics. Are these objectable true facts? Yes, but you don't seem to care. You just care that evolution is true because you need it to be true. Your job and income rely on it. The concept of evolutionary theory in the minds of children is destructive. It causes more kids to become atheists than any other theory on Earth. And atheists lead the world in depression, medication intake, suicide, and school shootings. Good job, Bill Nye.
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
They said if Darwin's title of The Origin of Species is it racist?
Yeah, of course it's racist.
Gotcha.
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
They said if Darwin's title of The Origin of Species is it racist?
Yeah, of course it's racist.
Gotcha.
Toolbox?
Yes.
Why do your ears look like that?
All Vulcans have similarly shaped ears.
Why?
It is a result of many millennia of evolution.
Should it make you hear better?
No.
Hey guys, this is Standing for Truth. We are live tonight. I am here with Raw Matt, and we are going to have some fun tonight. We are talking about biblical creation and health, the Bible way to better health. So we're going to get started here. You know what? Today we're going to learn about certain foods, dangerous foods to avoid, and healthy substitutions that we can make, how to detoxify our body, the biblical way, because we know that evolutionary science, it hinders real science and real advancement. Evolution, teaches that we're all just evolved chemicals, and then they want to treat the body with nothing but chemicals. But the Bible way to health is totally different. The biblical creation model in regards to health is what we're going to get into today. So, Matt, I want to introduce you to the audience for tonight's broadcast. Yeah, go ahead, man.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. We haven't actually got a chance to do this before, and this is one of my favorite subjects. So this will be really good. I'm excited to actually give people something that they're going to be able to take home with them for after this, something that they can start applying immediately. So a lot of people like to say that creationism doesn't actually bring anything to the table. It doesn't help science, and it doesn't help people. Well, we're going to show that this is going to be completely the opposite. Matter of fact, it's actually not evolution theory that doesn't do anything for medicine anyway. That's actually cell theory. So creationism is just like evolution theory is, but it's the opposite. It has many branches of science, and it has many different diversities that we in. Like creationists can be paleontologists, geologists, biologist. It doesn't really matter. They're just like any scientist can be. So we're the same way. So today people are going to be able to grab their notepad, take some notes down, and learn a lot.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that brief introduction, Matt. You know what? I'm really excited for this as well. I think a lot of people are going to benefit highly from this. We'll start off here. Matt, we've all heard about the importance of antioxidants. For example, God's wonder agents against cancer. We've heard about, anti-inflammatory diets are the key, to beating a lot of these diseases, a lot of these inflammatory related diseases. So what are some things that, people can do today and in the future that are going to benefit them the Bible way?
Oh, well, that's a pretty good question. Antioxidants are one good factor, one key factor, especially in today's world. We're kind of bombarded with a lot more free radicals than we've ever have been in the past, especially with a lot of people smoking and drinking and doing a lot more drugs, and just, around an atmosphere that's much more toxic. We have much more environmental toxins around us and pollution than we've ever had. So the body's under a little bit more of a stress than it has been. So, antioxidants are just one of these keys, but that's one of the major factors as well, is that the diet should be the base on what we do and what we should focus on, because diet is what we consume multiple times a day in large amounts. A lot of people try to mitigate the damage with just a little bit of a supplement, and that's not really going to do the job, because you're only taking a small amount randomly when you think about it. But food should be the priority, because you're doing it constantly and you're doing large amounts of it. So we want to go to the biblical account for this, meaning the Bible gives us two scenarios in the very beginning on these things. One is that man was created. That's the first. And two, the Bible refers to what's called the fall, where sin brought death into the world. Now, those two things can give us a very clear story and model to follow. One, our model is genetic degradation, where the buildup of disease and mutations occur every generation. And this is evident in what's called Sanford's model of genetic entropy. So it's kind of what I go by. And two, we were created in Genesis 1:29 to eat a certain way. And that would be eating as a base of mostly fruit, where 80% of your diet or more is based on fruit. So I promote a fruitarian diet in high amounts, and that's what I eat, because that's the highest concentrations of antioxidants in your foods that you can possibly get. So you're constantly helping your body to mitigate damage and to fight and free radicals and any types of disease that would really be coming in. See, a lot of the new diets and trends that are out now really push lots of heavy meat, which miss all the vitamin C, which miss all the fiber, which doesn't have many antioxidants. So you get a lot more problems with those than you actually do benefits. So would you like me to keep going?
Oh, sorry. No, that's okay. I just had you on mute there. Well, in regards to, antioxidants, I've certainly heard about the benefits of a certain antioxidant called glutathione. I know it's not the best antioxidant out there, and I know you know a little bit more about it than I do. Did you want to kind of elaborate on that, Matt?
Sure. Well, let's take a look at it like this. Let's break it down for the audience that might not know what glutathione is. We'll start at the most powerful metabolic enzymes of the body, and we'll take a look at it like the liver. So what happens is the liver does about 500 different things, but some of the most important ones is that it comes down to making metabolic enzymes for the body, because they are what fight free radicals better than anything else. The most damaging free radical in the body is actually called superoxide. Our liver produces something called superoxide dismutase, and now it should produce it at quite a good quantity as we age. Unfortunately, when we're in our peak, we produce somewhere around 80 to 90 micrograms per milliliter in our bodies, and we live about 80 to 90 years. Primates produce around 40 micrograms per deciliter, and they live around 40 years. So we know that how much your body produces of this metabolic enzyme is akin to how long you're probably going to live. Unfortunately, people really hurt their liver and they stress these metabolic enzymes out. But we actually don't live as long because we stress their liver. So anyway, going back to the liver and the glutathione, is now what happens is when we get a lot of free radicals in the superoxide in the body, the liver is going to produce a superoxide dismutase, which dismutates, or AKA breaks down superoxide into something less damaging for the body, and that's glutathione or hydrogen peroxide. Now, hydrogen peroxide is in the body and should be around 33.8%. Well, what happens is now the liver has to produce glutathione to actually mitigate that and turn it into water, so that now the metabolic enzyme catalase can come along and we can urinate it out. So it's a step-by-step process for the body. So just taking glutathione isn't the best idea. And just like taking superoxide isn't the best idea, because these supplements actually make your body stop producing these metabolic enzymes. I'm for taking certain medicinal herbs that help the body produce these metabolic enzymes, and we're going to learn about that today. So we really want to mitigate the damage by also not hurting the body by doing lots of supplementation. We want our body to actually work for it. It's like people that want to exercise and get the big muscles, but they actually don't want to work out or go to the gym. It's the same. Right. You have to earn it.
What type of things can we do that is going to help best detoxify our body? And secondly, Matt, what are some of the most important nutrients that we need on a daily basis? And before you answer that, I really liked how you talked about, genetic entropy, genome degradation, and how, in the Garden of Eden, we were told to eat, the fruits, the vegetables, and the seeds. And that's where we get a lot of the, the details of what we're talking about here is we get it straight from the Bible. It's the Bible way to health, as we talked about earlier. And I like how we kind of touched on the fact that evolution promotes healing through chemicals, And at the end of the day, I mean, it's riddled with side effects, which, we can get into a little bit later. But, I just kind of wanted to touch on those two things. But yeah, in regards to, ways we can detoxify our body and some of the most important nutrients that we should all be taking on a daily basis for the betterment of our health, Matt.
That's right. That's right. You had two questions at the beginning of your statement. What were those? They were in regards
what would be some of the best ways we can do to detoxify our body, and then what are some of the most important nutrients that we should be consuming, say, on a daily basis for the best health possible?
Sure. Well, diet would be number one. Raw fruits are very clathrative. They are very cleansing to the body. They pick up a lot of debris and things like that, but they can't always pick up on everything. So I'm a really big fan of activated charcoal or activated carbon. It's a really cheap supplement, and people don't really know too much about it. It's non-toxic. Everybody can obtain it. It's fairly cheap. Because most people don't know about it, it's still really actually cheap. I recommend to the audience listening, don't buy the powder. You're going to ruin your sink. You're going to ruin your kitchen. It's a horrible mess. You'll ruin your clothing. Just buy them in capsules until you can worry about, like, okay, how am I going to take this in a powder? You can mix it in your smoothie, but it's going to stain your blender, your sink, everything. So be ready for that. But there's no toxic load. They've actually tried to kill animals taking activated charcoal, and they filled up their food bins with about 50% charcoal, and they lived 35% longer. So it's actually really beneficial, because as the activated carbon goes through your body, it actually binds to toxins and things that your body doesn't recognize. Toxic chemicals and pollutants. We get a lot of parabens in from plastics into our body, and charcoal is actually able to recognize those. A lot of people like bentonite clay, but I'm not a fan of bentonite because it's very high in heavy metals. So don't really rely on that. There's a lot of cleanses that are out there, but just don't really reach for those unless you kind of want to make a comment in my section here. So, I would recommend kind of just going through my book. Actually, I'll just post it for free for everybody. So all of the questions that most people will have, they can find just in the book. And I don't see a problem with just giving it out anyway. It's a great read. It really doesn't talk too much about anything except for longevity. Now, longevity to me means disease prevention. So there's lots of disease. Matter of fact, there's lots of anti-cancer remedies in it, but they're cancer specific. It doesn't say this fights cancer. It's like each cancer is very, very different. That's what people don't understand. Like I hear Ken Hovind say, just take this and it'll cure cancer. Well, no, you got to be careful, because some cancers are very estrogenic or estrogen dominant. So you got to be careful, because by eating lots of seeds, you're going to raise your phytoestrogen level, and that won't be good. So sorry, did you say something?
No. I was, so a lot of it would be a multitude of things, a combination of things. And I'm looking at some of the questions here in the audience, because I have some other questions to ask you too. But a lot of questions are coming in. Maybe we'll just ask a couple of those first. The one here was from Praise I Am That I Am. Yeah. He asked, let me see here. My question to Matt is, what are his thoughts on the keto diet?
Ketogenic is good to be in for a while, but it's too hard to last long term. See, the brain and the body really runs off glucose first. Glucose is the main powerhouse for supplying energy for the body and the brain. Ketogenic runs on ketones, so it will function and it does really good, but this is mostly because our society is very overweight. So it's great for losing weight. There's no doubt about it. And it's very good to actually do when you're bodybuilding, but there's no real high amount of antioxidants in a ketogenic diet, because you're mostly getting your calories from lots and lots of meats. And people today don't just go to the store and buy like organ meats and like fresh cuts and grass fed, which are high in gamma-linolenic acids. They go to the grocery store and they buy meat that's been sprayed to look red, and fish that have been fed astaxanthin so that they have red pigments, so they look like they're mature when they're not. And they're eating grain rather than grass. I don't know. It's just not very good, because what you have to consume on a ketogenic diet isn't the best, but it's not bad to do. It's just not good to do long term.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate that answer, Matt. Another question we have here was from Korag Nightwolf. He's asking, what's healthier, well done, medium, or rare meat?
Um, I'm guessing he's talking about like hamburger meat. Well, they've actually found when it comes to advanced glycotic end products, our glycation, the fast food restaurants actually serve the best meat because of the fast preparation method where it's heated. But when it comes in terms of how damaging something is, meat is a class 1 carcinogen worldwide. So meat isn't very optimal. So the best way to prepare it is actually boiled in water. Now, what happens is when you expose anything to flames, glycation occurs. That's when the cross linkages of proteins and carbohydrates or proteins and fats cross, and your body doesn't recognize them, so they become very cancerous. The body doesn't deal well with them. So they have charts for this, and red meat's very dangerous usually when exposed to heat. But when you throw it on the grill and it's heated really fast, like in a fast food restaurant, it's actually much better for it than actually cooking it slowly. So obviously you don't want to cook it extremely hard, because the more charbroiled it is, the more black it is, the more glycation has occurred, and the more that's going to age you. The acronym for advanced glycotic aging, or advanced glycotic end products, is AGE, AGE, because it directly ages you.
Okay, awesome for that answer. Let me see here. Another one was from Doc Savage. I'm not too sure how serious this question is, but he simply asked, do you know what antioxidant stress is? I'm not sure if he's implying that, antioxidants to some degree can be harmful, but how would you answer that?
Yeah, they can be. And too much of anything really can be harmful. Antioxidants are no different, but there's two different forms. There's antioxidants that are water soluble, and there's antioxidants that are lipid or fat soluble. So most of the time, people don't really worry about the water soluble ones. They pound them like crazy because they feel confident they can just urinate them out. I'm not a fan of that. I'm a fan of more restriction. I'm a restrictor in calories. I'm a restrictor on most things, and so I don't really recommend people going out and just buying high antioxidant supplements. You'll see that in my book. I don't advertise that at all, actually. So he's right in that regard. But most of the things that are out there aren't really sold just for their antioxidant, properties. That's just an advertising sales pitch. Did you know the most powerful antioxidant that exists is actually in clove? It's the eugenol that's found in there, which is a volatile oil. They actually found that clove is extremely high as an antioxidant, but unfortunately, it activates mTOR, and we don't really want to do that for longevity purposes. So we can get into more of that later.
Based on the world that we live in, with the constant bombardment of chemicals, GMOs, pollution, just environmental factors, just in general, are we all, for the most part, toxic to some degree?
Oh, absolutely. We can look at mutation buildup, and we even know that women are told not to have children over 40 because of the constant mutation buildup in their bodies. The rate of retardation and deformities and things like that go up exponentially after the age of 40. And men, usually the more mutations that we have, the longer we live, the worse it is for our child as well, even more so than women. I think women are more protected because of their progesterone levels, and their fat content's a little bit higher, so they can buffer toxins a little bit more. And they're also protected because of aromatization. Basically, their hormones they don't flip to damaging as readily as men. See, we just have testosterone as our main hormone, so it flips to DHT in one flip. As where women, it has to flip a lot before it can actually get to there. So they have a lot more buffer and padding going on, as where mutations from men just they're a little bit worse. But yeah, like you said, we're smoking, we're drinking, we're eating lots of glycotic foods that we really haven't in the past because of fast food restaurants that have never really existed. And then we have we're flying everywhere, and in the high atmosphere there's more radiation bombardment than it's ever been around. So we combine all of these different things. We have mitochondrial diseases, the mutation buildup. We have fungus and mold, yeast, bacteria, viruses, parasites, heavy metal toxicity, free radical damage, acrylamides, mycotoxins, cancers, heart disease, diabetes. I can go down the list, but all of these things are really detrimental, because after we actually go past a certain amount of cellular divisions, we actually have to now worry about senescence kicking in. And this is the phenomenon where cells are no longer able to divide, but they don't die and let others divide. So they may do other things that they're not supposed to do, like secreting proteins that can be harmful. So we have to be really careful, and we don't want to cause more harm than good. And unfortunately, not only are we surrounded by toxins and pollutions more than ever before, but people have more unhealthy habits than they've ever had before. They vape when they're in the movie theater, they go out and they smoke cigarettes that aren't just tobacco, they're chemicals laced with it as well. So just bad habits that people have constantly. It's really bad.
So it's like, for example, when I talk a lot about, genomic decay, genetic entropy, I'll often say, it's entropic degeneration on all levels. And would you say that a lot of it is also epigenetic related?
Epigenetics probably has a lot to do, definitely, with it. We know that they've actually been curing Alzheimer's recently with epigenetics.
Wow.
So epigenetics is great. Yeah, it's a whole new field of science that's branching out. I wish it was more powerful, more people looked at it, but it's really just kind of like a taboo subject right now. They're not really getting into it. They're more looking at genes and the CRISPR and things like that to alter our genes, which is good. I mean, that's awesome. Everything that's in us is genetic related. So epigenetics is switching genes on and off. So that's kind of like where I come in through diet and supplementation, is I'm using these things to epigenetically alter our genes, because we can't really do this safely yet, because we know certain genes are directly correlated with longevity. Take, for example, the sirtuins, the 7 of them, the FOXO genes. We have a lot of genes that are directly related to how long we're going to live. We want to switch these on, but we can't really do that yet permanently. So in the meantime, unless we're born with those genes on, we have to switch them on epigenetically. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with diet and health and supplementation and herbalism. So.
Well, it's interesting because, in a lot of my debates and discussions on, genomic decay, the evolutionists oftentimes will say, there's no evidence for this type of genetic degeneration. And, I'll explain to them that, we see genetic related, diseases on the rise. And obviously a lot of it's due to environment as well, like autoimmune diseases, for example. You got multiple sclerosis, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and the list just goes on in regards to autoimmune diseases. You've got increased rates of asthma, immunological diseases, cancers on the rise, autism. Now, if a lot of this is, say, due to, mutation accumulation, what can we do to, prevent it? Is this can this be done through diet, through vitamin supplementation, through drinking cleaner water, avoiding chemicals to the best that we can, or is it inevitable, Matt?
Mutations are going to build up. They're inevitable, but how we deal with them once they're in our bodies is mitigated. We can control to some degree how much it's going to damage us. So yeah, we unfortunately have a really harmful mutation that most people don't really know about, and it's in everybody. It's called the MTHFR, the METHFR. It's an acronym. It stands for ethylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, and this is a gene that helps the humans methylate. It regulates homocysteine levels, it repairs DNA, and it turns genes on and off. So as you can tell, it's very important. And it's one of the worst mutations that everybody has today. No one knows how important this is, so I'm going to tell everybody right now. This mutation is a serious example of genetic degradation at its finest, because it leads to more widespread genomic degradation. So if our first people had no MTHFR mutations, then if it was starting to accumulate, it would spread out and cause it to be widespread. And that's what we see. This common genetic error accelerates genetic deterioration because it affects methylation cycles. It's typically a homomethylation or a hypomethylation. It speeds up the methylation. So since methylation stabilizes the genome and RNA molecules, homomethylation is strongly associated with methylation profiles, which pretty much lead to problems with cellular differentiation, gene expression, DNA methylation, or transcription. It's the fact that this mutation increases the risk of more mutations. So if we have it, which we do, then they end up being in the germline and being passed on to the next generation. So now we can see why everybody has this today. Currently, there's 34 of these deleterious mutation genes affecting the MTHFR gene. Two of the most researched are what are called C667T and A1298C. Basically, each of these mutations have a different impact on how this gene performs within the body. Depending on the mutation that you have, you can even have both of them, but the consequences are slightly different, but all are harmful. Each mutation allows a similar trend towards less methylation within the body or less folate production, depending on which one you have. But the single mutation is present in the gene and and it can affect you anywhere from 20% to 70%. That's huge. Imagine if you had 70% loss of dysfunction. Now that's going to be 70% less methylation that you're doing. I mean, if you're lucky, you get 20%. Americans have 20% of the population have just one of those mutations. Another 20% have the other one. So now if you have both of those genes, 40% of the American population have one of these genes. That's horrible. So if you have this, it's going to affect the breakdown of toxic estrogens. It's going to block cellular metabolism. It's going to do a whole list of things. So we definitely have this problem going in our body, and we need to now consume foods that help methylation. So there's methylsulfonylmethane. It stands for MSM. It's a sulfur-bearing compound you can buy. It's also really, really cheap. It tastes absolutely disgusting. So don't mix it with water and expect to drink it very easily. It's water soluble, so you would take a little bit in the morning and you take a little bit at night. It's not in your foods if you cook every meal that you have, because it's very volatile to heat. So if you're cooking every meal, you probably don't have much MSM in your foods or your water, so it's not going to be there at all. So it's better to supplement with something like that. It'll really help increase your methylation levels. And since vegetarians and vegans themselves die from heart disease because of homocysteine levels, because they eat lots of oil. You see, they've just replaced eating cheese and meat with lots of olive oil and coconut oil, so they lather their foods up. And because they don't methylate very well, these things build up, and the homocysteine levels build up and up and up. And because they don't methylate good, they die from the same reason that a meat eater will. So we want to have strong methylation levels, and we don't want to eat foods that have been processed. So I guess I could get into some supplements, but if you have any more questions, let's do it.
No, that's really interesting. It seems like a lot of it comes down to the cellular level, right? Deep cleansing our body down at that level of the cell, and then at the end of the day, it's like a ripple effect. You're going to renew your health, your vitality, restore your energy, and just reclaim your health and shed toxins.
Yeah, the easiest thing for people to do is skip eating. Don't eat for multiple hours until you have to eat. Eat just lunch and dinner. What happens is when you polyphasic eat and have long stretches of 16 to 18 hours of not eating, you drop into a phase called autophagy. And it's where your cells are actually able to clean up the debris by themselves without any dietary supplement or regimen that's really going on. You can just polyphasic eat and actually benefit tremendously. So that's really good.
Well, from my understanding, like a lot of so for example, when it comes to fasting and things like these, the best way to get rid of toxins, because it seems like, a lot of diseases, a lot of issues that are directly related to the buildup of toxins. I mean, you're looking at asthma, food and environmental allergies, fibromyalgia, chronic pain syndromes, insomnia, even for women, like menstrual problems, abdominal bloating, hypertension, atherosclerosis, other autoimmune diseases. So for one, is that true? And the best way to alleviate a lot of those things versus, say, a lot of the prescription drugs, because you find that you're prescribed one drug and then that drug has a list of side effects, and then you need another separate drug for those lists of side effects, and before you know it, you're on 10 to 15 different drugs. So
Yeah.
I imagine it's much better to alleviate some of these diseases through the ridding of toxins.
Absolutely. We're talking pharmaceuticals are symptom suppressors. They say, okay, well, you're having problems with calcium in the body. The calcium is too high. It's above 10, so we need to drop that down. So they put you on something called a calcium channel blocker. Well, now that blocks calcium from getting into your blood. That's very good because having high calcium in the blood is very detrimental, right? So now you get on this prescription drug, and now all of a sudden your calcium levels go below what they're supposed to be at. So now all of a sudden you're on something that you're not supposed to be on anymore, but they don't take you off of it. So now you get a horrible problem where there's actually not enough calcium being absorbed into the body. So now you have bone degenerative diseases. So it's a cycle. You know, they're trying to make money. Certain pharmaceuticals, I can understand, they make sense, but most of them are used as suppression for something. They're not a cure. That's why you're on them for life. They're not a cure for anything. And we want cures. We want people to be healthy, right? So yeah,
so it's like a Band-Aid versus it's like you're not actually getting to the root problem. You're just putting a temporary Band-Aid on it. And you got to put this Band-Aid on over and over and over again instead of getting to the root cause.
Exactly. And it's really a shame too, because once you get the base down and you can see how disease starts to incubate and build up and how calcification is a problem, you don't let it render itself. You don't wait till you get arthritis before you go, okay, maybe I should do something about this. You just mitigate it throughout every decade and you prevent it. You prevent it from occurring. And I'm about prevention rather than repairing. Unfortunately, most of the time I'm repairing because people have already done the damage. Most people care when it's too late. Most people care about losing, fixing the disease when they have it. They don't care about learning about a disease. So I like to come ahead and learn about it first. I want to know, like, okay, well, what's causing people to die? Let's take a look at heart disease, diabetes, and cancer and calcification, because those four things are what's killing people at a high rate. So once you learn and understand about those diseases, now you can learn to mitigate them before they actually become a problem. And that's what we're really gonna cover. So unless there's more questions, of course, in the comment section.
No, I mean, even in regards to what you just said, even when it comes down to like flus and colds, I think too many people rush right to the doctor, and then all of a sudden the physicians are, turning and prescribing, say a fever, for example, they're looking to Tylenol, they're looking to antibiotics, but we know, like Tylenol, for example, analgesics, anti-inflammatories like Motrin and stuff, those actually deplete levels of, say, glutathione and other types of antioxidants in our body. And I think it's interesting that, like, animals, for example, Matt, when they're sick, what they'll often do is they'll go to a secluded place, say near a source of water, and then what they do, I guess by instinct, I don't know, they rest, they drink water, and they fast. And yet when we're sick, it's almost how important is it for us to do almost the same? Rest, fast, drink lots of water, juices, and then that way, we're nourishing our bodies and healing it that way instead of just putting that temporary Band-Aid.
Yeah, I find that is exactly the same. We do the opposite of what we're supposed to do. Everyone says, go make sure you get your nice chicken broth. Make sure you're getting your calories in. If you're sweating, make sure you get hotter so you can sweat it out. It's like, what are you talking? You should be in cold water. That's boosting glutathione levels. You don't need to be eating. You want your body to be, your liver to be functioning properly and purging these things out. And when you eat, you're creating insulin. So your liver stops doing what it's supposed to because now it has to concentrate it on multiple other processes. So you're right. Watching the animals themselves, you can learn a lot that way.
And I think we'll go soon into the supplements. I'll ask a couple more audience questions, try and get as many as I can. Then we'll go directly into, which supplements, we should be taking.
Sure.
So I see here Koreg Nightwolf. He asks, what's your position on apple cider vinegar, Matt?
Apple cider vinegar is one of the better vinegars. It's one of the few vinegars out there that's actually really good. I don't like any of the other vinegars, mostly because of how they're processed. Apple cider vinegar is in its raw, natural state, so it's very unprocessed. It just becomes very alkaline in the body, is where others are very, very acidic. So it's a great one to add to your foods. It's going to help stimulate more hydrochloric acid. So if you have trouble digesting, like let's say you're going to have a heavy meat meal, it's very good to have apple cider vinegar with that, because it'll really help stimulate more hydrochloric acid to digest that meal. It doesn't really work, obviously, with carbohydrates because that's amylase. But when it comes to proteins, yeah, apple cider vinegar is a great way to go. I think it's the best one to have.
Yeah, with myself, even just an anecdotal, evidence or personal story, like even I used to have issues with heartburn or, gastroesophageal reflux, and, the doctors, they'll give you these medications. I think they're in the category of proton pump inhibitors, or I can't remember for sure right now, but a lot of those that they give you, those will have, various side effects. And yet when I took the apple cider vinegar every single morning, as well as warm water with lemon, that within a couple weeks completely cured, the heartburn and the issues. So, and there's so many stories like that, personal stories that people have where, instead of taking the prescription drugs that they would have had to take in forever and then have a multitude of side effects, they did what was natural, the Bible way to better health, and it worked. It succeeded. You don't need chemicals all the time.
Oh, I know. Yeah, no. Most people reach to them because they don't know any better, and they see TV commercials go by. So that's kind of where they get it from.
Well, I got another question here. Evolution is zombie science. He asked, how do you prevent and keep away from blood clots?
Oh, blood clots. Well, that's a good one. Usually, well, if you have deep vein thrombosis in the genes or something like that, that's a real problem. But blood clots themselves, you can kind of roll them out. It just depends on how bad something would be. Blood clots themselves can be a detriment, but I mean, really, really, really bad. It just depends on their varying degree. Does he mean like from training, or does he mean like really bad, like a car wreck?
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's absolutely necessary that you're going to need, heparin and warfarin and all these anti-blood clotting drugs. I think that's a good answer from you. Our buddy Dwayne Gish, you can answer this question or not. He's asking, I guess it was something that you talked about earlier. What is the molecular reaction that actually activates C or its compounds? Does that make sense to you, Matt?
Is he talking about vitamin C?
Let's see if he clarifies here.
I mean, ascorbic acid is wrapped in copper, so yeah, they kind of, you don't want to just take vitamin C powder and expect to absorb it. Really, it's going to be in its natural form, which is ascorbic acid wrapped in copper peptides, and it's going to be absorbed in its natural form. We want to eat fruits, we want to eat natural compounds. We don't want that. If he was talking about like charcoal or activated carbon, then that one's just, it's already been pre-made. It's just a pure activated.
Actually, yes, it is activated carbon. You just clarified.
Okay.
Being a little ambiguous, I think. But yeah, activated carbon.
Yeah, they process that in a manner where it's oxygen free. They now make it out of coconut husks, and it's just every fullerene that there is that's bound inside those inside that husk. So that's really what you want. You want a lot of variety when it comes to these fullerenes. A lot of the activated charcoal, the more fullerenes that are in it, the more they can attach, because they have multiple different shapes. So they can attack and bind to more toxins and pollutions and chemicals that are in the body and remove them. So you can take it with whatever you want. They've actually found on a study, though, that if you take it with lipids or fats, they actually tend to work better because they can be recirculated to some degree, but they're going to come out in your waste. You'll see it. It'll be black. It'll be kind of constipating as well. So be ready for that if you want to take a lot of it.
What about, you know what, a question for me. What about heavy metal toxicity? So, for example, a lot of these heavy metals we might consume, say, even in the water we drink, and you know, other various means, you know, do they end up building up in, say, your brain tissues and just in your body tissues in general and lead to certain diseases like, you know, Alzheimer's, dementia? I mean, and what's the best way we can do to not only prevent, you know, heavy metal toxicity and heavy metals in general? If someone does have heavy metal toxicity and they're having some effects from it, what's the best way that they can rid themselves of it, Matt?
Well, heavy metals mostly come in kind of through diet. So, for example, I know a lot of people that eat a lot of chocolate, lots of coffee, lots of vegetables. So those can have high amounts of cadmium. Vegetables are very high in cadmium, so vegetarians usually have high cadmium levels. There's lots of arsenic and things, and yeah, they build up. The body tries to buffer them. I mean, we store toxins in our fat. That's why it's usually not the best to consume fats of animals, because if they eat toxins, then you eat their fat, then you get those same toxins. So it's the same concept with us. We store toxins in our fat. So if we are losing weight real fast, those toxins dump into the bloodstream, making us feel a little sick and nauseous. Again, charcoal comes in for that as well. But we can mitigate heavy metals from a couple ways. Hawthorn flower and leaf has been shown to remove lots of heavy metals. That's really good. Another one is sun chlorella. That's a great supplement. A little pricey, but it works really good. A lot of people reach towards cilantro, but that just depends on the soil that they're grown in. You can actually cause heavy metals if you actually don't do that one right. So I'm more of a proponent of the hawthorn leaf and flower and sun chlorella. Make herbal teas out of hawthorn flower and leaf. Drink the water that comes from that tea every day. Those metals will bind and they'll come out in the urine. And then the sun chlorella will bind for the lipid soluble form. So it can get rid of the excess that come in that way. So those are two of the best heavy metal detox forms that are the easiest, and you don't need to know the other ones.
Well, a funny thing that just came to mind too is because I've found that when talking with evolutionists and people that just reject the Bible, a lot of times they'll bring up like bacteria and certain infections as, you know, bad design. And I quickly realized that these evolutionists, they don't even understand that, you know, there exists what's called good bacteria and that probiotics are healthy for us. I mean, there's about 100 trillion bacteria that reside in our large bowel. And I think there's like more than 400 different species of bacteria that actually live there. And fortunately, most of these bacteria are actually extremely beneficial, and you wouldn't want to try to live without them. So I always tell the evolutionists, why don't you try living in a world without bacteria? And yet they want to use, like, you know, bad bacteria as an example of bad design. But I mean, how important is, say, probiotics, good bacteria in regards to our immune system, in regards to just all types of, because it seems like a lot of disease comes from directly from our gut itself. So what happens if we heal our gut, say, with good bacteria? Can you just go into the issue of bacteria in general for a bit there, Matt?
Yeah, sure. Well, you're talking a little bit about the microbiome. That's influenced by what we eat as well. So it's very important. The gut-brain bacteria are definitely correlated with each other. I know that probiotics are very important, and so are prebiotics. That's the food for the bacteria in your gut. So I don't want just people to run out and go buy a bunch of probiotics, because we don't want to be dependent on those either. We have our base that's in our gut. We want to feed them what's there, but we might need to reproduce or produce just a little bit more as well. There's a whole different strains. There's Lactobacillus acidophilus, there's bifidus bacteria, there's planet. So there's a lot of different strains. But like you said, there's actually more bacteria in us than there are blood cells. So bacteria is far more important than people give it credit for. And people are always blaming God for creating these harmful bacterias and these new bacteria popping up. And it's like, look, we have bacteria. There's enough bacteria in your room right now that if you were to fall over and die, they would start degrading your body and consuming you until you were gone. Same thing. If there were 100 elephants, there would be enough bacteria to consume it all away in an eventually amount of time. But what happens is we invent tons of chemicals, right? There's over 500 different things that we make from crude oil alone. Plastic, glass, all kinds of things. So when we throw these things into the environment, what happens when those bacteria now come along and try to degrade those things and try to eat them? Well, what happens is they mutate, right? They're like, what the hell is this? I need to eat it and I can't. So it starts mutating. And unfortunately, the mutation that usually occurs is harmful to other things. It's harmful to them, not necessarily them, but it's harmful to other things. That's where flesh-eating bacteria can come from. So of course, the people are blaming God for something because they don't understand the steps of usually how these bacteria are what they're supposed to do. So, you know, people like to blame God for everything, as you would imagine.
Well, I just find it amazing that, you know, you bring up the fact that, you know, bacteria is good for us, you know, and they're just clueless, you know, because they just look at some tired argument on some anti-creation website and they look at something to do with bad design. But no, I appreciate that that answer there, Matt. Another question was from Evolution is Zombie Science. I got to scroll up. I think it was diverticulitis. How do you cure diverticulitis?
Unfortunately, diverticulitis is pockets that are in the esophagus. So foods like nuts and seeds and popcorn kernels and tomato skins get stuck in there. So it actually makes it worse. It's very hard to cure because almost everything you're eating is it can get deposited in those little flasks. So usually doctors just cut that area out. There isn't a known natural cure for this except for giving that area a break to replenish. But that's a very long fast. So somebody like you couldn't be making smoothies to live on because even those have seeds in them. So you're going to have to really be thinking ahead on like, what can I consume that's going to like coat that area that won't allow anything into those pockets where that'll cause it to inflame and get bigger and cause the problems to get worse. That's a very hard cure. Right now, they don't know of anything naturally to do it, but the body can fix itself. So you're going to want to do something that's deprivative right now. You're going to have to look at the foods that won't get stuck in those, and you can find that list online. That list it won't be a fun list, I'll tell you that right now. But if you follow it pretty strictly, not only will it not cause the diverticulitis to flare up, but it might give your chance of body to actually heal it up. So if it's depending on your age and how well you heal, and also what things you can take in the meantime to actually spur that process up. Because remember, every cell in the body has a turnover rate. Some are very quick, some are very slow. So you want to have the healing potential to be there at a very high rate. So at this time, your esophagus can heal from that problem. Okay, diverticulitis is awful.
And another thing that I kind of mentioned earlier too, that we briefly talked about, is the rise of autoimmune diseases. It seems like everybody knows somebody who's got some type of autoimmune disease, and you know, for the audience sake, that's just something where it's a type of disease where the immune system actually attacks itself. It's kind of like it's a similar process to it's like friendly fire, right? A healthy immune system can actually tell the difference between normal cells and invader cells. But in these autoimmune diseases, let's use, say, lupus, or what's another one that comes to mind, multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, you see a lot of that. The immune system actually gets confused, and then it produces antibodies that actually attack its own tissues, and then these tissues eventually become damaged. And it's a really, these diseases are really sad, and they affect a lot of people, and a lot of the drugs that are used to treat them, from my understanding, are steroids and drugs that actually create further and aggravating symptoms. So for people who may be suffering from those types of diseases, what can they do, I guess, for one, to prevent that type of disease, and for someone who has it to hopefully alleviate its symptoms or even just cure it in general?
Yeah, there's some really good herbs out there for curing. They're called immunomodulators is what they are. One's called cat's claw or unil del gato. You can take this as an herbal tea and squeeze some lemon in it. Lemon has actually been shown to boost the effects of it. And if your immune system is low, it'll raise it. If it's a little too high, it'll lower it. That's really key, because a lot of us are eating food sometimes that we don't know that can cause autoimmune disorders. For example, garlic. My dad was eating raw garlic constantly, every single day. Not only was it unpleasant to smell it coming out of his pores, but he didn't know that by doing this all the time, he was actually causing his immune system to be too high. And when it runs too high, it's like a race car. You can't run the thing flat out all the time. They can't handle it. So it eventually becomes a problem. So what happens is when your immune system's running at full drive all the time or too low all the time, it becomes a problem as well. So you get an autoimmune disorder from this. It's not meant to run at such a high volume. So what happens is when you can take these herbs, they balance this out, like a maca root, for example, or a cat's claw or a chaga mushroom. These are immunomodulators. So you can take them and be confident that they'll come along and they'll balance out this immune system for you. That's a really good way.
So in general now, as we were, I'll wait for some more questions to come in that actually have to do with health and, people with legit questions here. But why don't we get to supplements? What are your most recommended supplements in regards to just in daily living and what we should be taking and how much we should be taking? Go ahead, Matt.
Sure. These are my favorite. I'll list them and why that I take them. I'll list what they are first, and then I'll list why I take them so that people that are taking notes can easily do it. One is I take grapeseed extract. I take an herb called gynostemma, or jogulin is another name for it. Then I take milk thistle seed alone by itself. The active ingredient is called silymarin, so I make sure that when I buy my milk thistle, it's 80% silymarin. Then I buy hawthorn berry, and then astragalus root, Japanese knotweed, and Lycium barbarum, also known as goji. Now, the reason I like these base herbs is because I combine them all together, except for milk thistle seed, because they tend to have a very broad spectrum ability to do multiple things in the body. For example, grapeseed extract is one of the most powerful aromatase inhibitors that there is. So that protects your hormones from flipping over and becoming detrimental. Gynostemma, or jogulin, lowers nuclear factor kappa B by 25%. That's a huge protection from cancers in the body, and it raises superoxide dismutase levels by a lot. Now that's huge because, as I was saying earlier, superoxide dismutase, the more of it you have, the longer you live. Now that's not always what a lot of people think, but when I've read through the research, mice that were lacking superoxide dismutase die shortly after birth because of massive oxidative stress. However, mice that are 50% deficient in superoxide dismutase have normal lifespans and minimal defects. So we know that there's a correlation between the two. Pigeons live about 12 times longer than rats, even though they weigh the same. The only difference is that pigeons have high superoxide dismutase levels. And so that's an amazing correlation right there. Fruit flies that have been genetically engineered to produce twice the amount of level of SOD end up living twice as long. So we know that there's a direct correlation. So now that's why I take the gynostemma. There's other things that raise it as well, but that's the specific herb that I take for that one. Then I like milk thistle seed on its own again because it's a very high in glutathione reductase. That's a very good one. And then there's faux tai. Its another name is hisho wu, but it's a glutathione peroxidase booster. So it's another really good one in conjunction with these other herbs because they work on the metabolic enzyme potential of the body. And we want those very strong at all points in our life. And because these are herbs, they help your body to actually produce them. You're not just giving these things to your body so it stops producing them themselves. Another one would be hawthorn berry. I take that for the EGCG. Now, astragalus root is taken for the telomere enhancement. They actually sell a specific alkaloid from astragalus root. It's called astragaloside 65, I think. And what that comes down to is it's a telomere booster that enhances them really, really quickly. Unfortunately, it's very expensive. So I don't think that it's necessary to get that specific supplement when C60 and astragalus root can do the same thing as long as you're buying the extract powder of it and you make a concentrated form of it by a decoction. Another one would be Japanese knotweed. It's a very cheap herb right now, and it's a very, very cheap form of what's called trans-resveratrol. A lot of people right now know about resveratrol because of the grape resveratrol, and it's known for longevity. Well, this is a better form called trans-resveratrol. It's more potent, and it's found in Japanese knotweed, so it's really cheap. And then the other one would be goji. I end that off with, because it's a sesquiterpenine, which means it's a human growth hormone precursor. So it helps your body boost human growth hormone. And most of the time, that's just done by working out. Not many foods on earth do that. So as we can see, like even old world antediluvian foods, heirloom foods, they're the best that are out there. These modern day hybrids, these genetically modified foods, they're more of like a Franken food. We don't even know the repercussions of mixing flounder fish with tomatoes so that they're cold resistant. What's that going to do to people? So I recommend people go back to the old world foods, and that's more safe. That's more applicable. We find that they're very beneficial. And when they do the studies of modern day tomatoes compared to the Lyceum barbarum, the heirloom outshines it every time. If you look at like modern day wheat, like winter and summer wheat, well, the more you go back in time, the better they get. You get spelt and then kamut and then emmer. You just go back, the better they get for you. So I see the correlation on that. So those are my favorite herbs. Those are what I personally take. And when it comes to other things like diet, I base mine mostly off fruit, and then I eat nuts and seeds. I don't eat vegetables. I don't eat meat. I don't eat dairy, and I don't eat grain. And every so often I'll do legumes, but if they're in the form of mesquite and carob. Other than that, I don't drink water. I really don't eat anything cooked if I can. And when I go out with my family, I'll just look at the list, the menu, and I'll order something special on the side. You know, like I'll get, we'll go to the Cheesecake Factory, for example. I'll get what are called the Thai lettuce wraps. And what I'll do from there is I'll take those and I'll special order everything and just, I'll say avocado instead of chicken. And then I'll make my own little burritos on the side.
And what do you mean exactly by like, you don't drink water? Like, what do you drink as a substitute?
Because I eat so much fruit, most of my water comes in from that. Like today I ate a papaya. That's my hydration. When I open my coconut to eat it, I drink the coconut water out of it. So most of my water just comes from fruit.
Well, what about when they say that, when it comes to water, you should be drinking, what is the recommended daily amount, 6 to 8 glasses of water? Are you saying that you're getting that amount just by eating fruits?
No, but I don't need to be, because I'm not eating cooked food that are constantly dehydrating me. I'm not eating high amounts of sodium. I'm eating more potassium, so my ratios are perfect. I think that drinking water is probably important if you're eating those standard American diets. Sure, you need something to flush these toxins out that you're eating from your food. I don't eat toxins, so I don't need to do that.
Good point. And I find it interesting since the title of this is, well, we could have titled it, many different things, toxic relief, restore health and energy through many different ways, fasting, detoxification, supplements, whatever it is. But it's funny because in your everyday life, in my everyday life, I'll talk to people that do hold to, an atheistic or just an evolutionary worldview. And you'll tell them that, the Bible clearly teaches that, we need to be eating the fruits, the seeds, the vegetables, and just living a very clean lifestyle through a very clean diet. And you'll try and tell them that, a lot of the things that lead to disease, lead to cancer, excessive intake of certain meats, excessive animal fat and other fats, because at the end of the day, these are inflammatory. And a lot of people, they're consuming so much inflammatory and toxic oils, trans fats, fried foods. It's America is your fast food diet, right? Your Coke, your hamburger, your fries, and then people are wondering why their health is going out the window, and then they're taking all these prescription drugs, and they're scoffing at your naturopathic doctors and your chiropractors and the people that are really out to help you. And you try and tell them that, to avoid excessive sugar and high glycemic foods, like white flour is huge. All these things weaken the immune systems. Or a lot of people are consuming, devitalized foods, salt, processed foods, junk foods. They're eating at wrong times of the day. They're eating late at night, and they're not avoiding toxins in our food, right? Nitrates are huge in processed foods and smoked and cured meats, and like you said earlier, heavy metals, mercury. You know, that's found in fish. It's even hard to find good fish these days that's not free from heavy metals such as mercury. So you try and tell these people these health tips, health facts, and they either scoff, they either ignore. And I think it comes down to the worldview. It comes down to the idea that we're nothing more than, you know, recycled stardust, evolved chemicals. So let's treat the body with chemicals. And yet, Matt, you're kind of saying the opposite, aren't you?
Absolutely. Chemicals are one of the last things we want to do. I can understand doing it if you have a horrible health issue, but that's not the normal case. If we're healthy, we never need them. We only have to resort to them if we're on like stage 4 cancer. Sure, of course we need some kind of boost or assistance because we should have never been there in the first place. But, you know, in 1901, America was ranked #1 in health in the nation, everywhere. That's incredible, considering now we're near dead last place. We've done something horribly wrong. You know, we depleted our topsoil, first of all. In the 1930s, we created the Dust Bowl. Before that, everybody was growing everything that they wanted. Everything. And everyone was healthy. Now nobody does really anything. They just go to the store and they don't know how to shop. They just go, everything is in an aisle. So it's in a box. So they get something that's enzymatically dead and completely dry, and then they take it home. And like you were saying, what's the standard American breakfast? A meal that nobody should even be eating, breakfast. And then what do they eat for it? Bacon and eggs? Are you kidding me? That's not what we were designed to do at all. Matter of fact, the University College of London did a 15-year study on 65,000 people, one of the largest studies ever done on dietary health and nutrition. And guess what they found out? That when people ate 6 servings of fruits and vegetables, they were healthier than the people that ate 5. And the people that ate 7 were healthier than the people that ate 6, all the way up to 9 or 10 servings before diminishing returns happened. Do you know how much that is to eat? That's your entire meal of every day of eating fruits and vegetables. So that's incredibly high. So basically it's saying we're fruitarian. So not only are we completely carbivores and fruitarian based on our anatomical features, our digestion, our saliva, our just biology, because that's what we were created to be. Genesis tells us that, but we absolutely have proof for that now. And the more we divert from that, the more unhealthy we get. And that's fact. So
no, I'm totally in agreement with you. One question from Jack Jackson asked, have you tried what's called high meat? Does that ring a bell there, Matt?
What? High meat? What does that mean? High meat diet?
I'm not sure. He just said, what do you think of high meat? So if he wants to clarify in the chat, but he seems like he's genuinely interested.
Well, high meat has its detriments. Like I was saying, the first problem with high meat is there's a lot of blood in red meat. Blood, if you want to read the book called The Calcium Bomb, the doctor wanted to prove that ulcers come from nanobacteria, which reside in blood from red meat. So he drank some of it and gave himself the ulcers the next day. I think he won a Nobel Prize from this. He proved, it's called The Calcium Bomb. He showed the detriment of nanobacteria being in calcium. Being in blood that's in red meat. So it's horrible for the body. We don't have the UXO enzyme to even break that substance down. The only reason that people are able to eat meat really is because, one, we cook it, so therefore it's not natural to begin with. And then secondly, we have hydrochloric acid in our stomach to somewhat process this down. If you were to just live off of meat, go ahead. You will die. It's not meant to be for us. The only reason we even eat it at all is because we incorporate other things to be eaten with it. I always tell people, if you think you were designed to eat it, go ahead. Let's have a competition, you and me. I'll just eat blueberries. You just eat whatever you want. I don't care. Pick grain, pick a legume, pick a meat. We'll just eat that. After a month, when you're giving up because you're horribly sick, then you'll understand what you were designed to eat. And the only thing that can possibly be is fruits. So I am not a fan of red meat, especially a high meat diet, for a very long time at all. If you give an obligate carnivore cholesterol, no amount, you can give it as much as you want. It'll never get high cholesterol levels, ever. A human being, you give them a little bit of meat. Even 1 egg a week was shown to skyrocket cholesterol so high that it mitigated the benefit of exercise. That's how much it does it. So we are definitely not meant to have it biologically.
Another good thing that we didn't touch on too much, I mean, cancer for one, but just in general, a lot of these diseases are associated with, you know, chronic inflammation. And inflammation is huge. And, you know, by eating more anti-inflammatory foods than, say, pro-inflammatory ones, you know, is it possible to, you know, tip your balance back into the right direction? And before you answer that, I'm not sure if you're familiar. I'm curious of your take on it. But if inflammation is such a huge reason and cause for so much disease and suffering, you know, I'm aware of certain tests you can do, blood tests, for example. I know one's called a CRP test, C-reactive protein. I think another one is called ESR. And what they do is, well, for example, CRP, C-reactive protein, it's a marker of inflammation and a promoter of inflammation. So if you test for that and see your levels, so for example, your CRP levels, you can actually see how significant your level of systematic inflammation is. So if you do these testings, you can see, you know, if your level of inflammation is high or if your level of inflammation is low. So would you recommend those types of tests just to see? Because if we're all generally possible, obviously we're all attacked daily by, you know, chemicals, inflammatory related foods. Would you recommend those types of tests for people to see where their inflammatory levels are?
Yeah.
And,
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. What was your other part?
And if so, and somebody, you know, realizes that they do have high inflammation in their blood versus, say, the inflammation and the anti-inflammation balance is off, what would you recommend for those people?
Okay, well, yeah, first of all, I definitely recommend the tests. The tests are always good to get because they're a good indicator of what you're doing. So if you're failing at your program, you can see these in the results and you can change that. If you don't know, it's very hard for us to tell because health is something that we don't really notice until it's kind of gone, kind of like gaining weight. It's like watching grass grow. You don't know if you're getting unhealthy. It just happens. You don't see your hair falling out. It's gone one day. It's kind of like that. So I definitely recommend testing, you know, methylmalonic acid test for B12, the C-reactive protein testing for the inflammation, all great stuff if you've got the money. As for what to do for inflammation, absolutely. There are things, but they're quite expensive actually. That ones that actually work, like nattokinase is a great enzyme from silkworms that really reduces inflammation. Wobenzyme from Garden of Life is a systemic anti-inflammatory, really, really good, but really expensive. If you just eat good, you don't have that problem. But like you said, we eat a lot of inflammatory things. We eat a lot of oils. Those are inflammatory. We eat a lot of problems. We actually dig our own grave with our spoon. So that's what we're doing. We're building up mutations from bad habits and bad lifestyle choices and pollutions and toxins. And then we go home, and when we're supposed to be eating our medicine, we're just eating our junk. So it's just problem on top of problem, man.
Well, I've got, you know what, we'll go one more question from the audience, and then we'll let you kind of close off on anything that you feel like you wanted to say that maybe you didn't get the chance to. I think, you know, you've been very informative. I think this has been very good and hopefully helpful to, you know, the people listening and people that'll listen to in the future. But a question here from Evolution to Zombie Science. He says, don't many genetic birth defects and disorders stem from mutations which evolutionists believe could be beneficial, but we only observe the harmful and perhaps stable ones? And then he says, weird.
Right. Well, that's what we base our model off of, is, you know, the actual the degradation. We're seeing disease. We're seeing problems. We don't see superhumans being born like X-Men, which we should be. We should be seeing people being born that have anti-cancer genes. But instead, what do we see? We see the BRCA1 and 2 gene for cancers that are popping up everywhere. We're seeing more mutations. 49 to 50% of the population that has cancer has it under the age of 50. So it's not that people are living longer and getting more cancer. Of course that happens because, like you said, we're building up mutations. As we age and every generation. And that's what we see when we look at disease. How it's ignored is beyond me, but I guess you can rationalize anything if you can believe that bacteria turn into whales and people. But that's, that story isn't really what I'm interested in. I look at disease and I see problems, and I don't see people adapting to problems. And when you do, you see epigenetic regulation. You don't see evolution. You don't see new anatomical features to built up around a cell to protect it from cancer. And people have been causing harm for themselves for quite a long time. And you know what I mean? People go, well, we can eat raw meat. Yeah, good luck with that. Go ahead, feel free. Eat a bunch of raw meat sometime. You'll have a great time with salmonella poisoning from that meal plan. Good job.
Well, and that's what's amazing when it comes to, that's why when you look at evolutionists that say, evolution is what promotes and advances science. But yet what we're saying here and proving and demonstrating is that it's quite the opposite. It's a biblical creation model and a biblical based worldview that actually advances science, and evolutionary science actually hinders science. Like a surgeon, for example, I love when they say that, because a surgeon, when he's performing heart surgery, the last thing he needs to think about or worry about or know about is whether or not pine trees and whales are related through common ancestry. And I love when evolutionists say things like, oh, you don't believe in evolution, you don't believe that pine trees and whales are related through common ancestry. Well, how do you like that cell phone? How do you like that car? And it's like they literally think that those things are due to evolutionary scientists and evolutionists themselves. I mean, that's through engineers, not evolutionists or, theoretical astrophysicists, these people that believe in these science fiction based religions. It's biblical creation that promotes and advances science. And unfortunately, these evolutionists deny genome degradation. We're accumulating 100 new mutations per person per generation. Mutations are deleterious. Mutations are destruction. They're not the creator. Beneficial mutations are rare. Even your rare beneficial mutation is reductive and destructive to some extent. And we're going down, not up. And the evolutionist wants to say that biblical creation doesn't promote science and that it hinders science. No. If more people thought like biblical creationists, we might be able to actually cure some of these diseases. We may actually be able to stall maybe the genetic degeneration just a little bit. But the evolutionists, they're the ones that hinder science, Matt, and they're the ones that deny science. And we've seen that over and over and over again.
Oh, I know. They fight against everything, it seems like. I mean, I don't really know what their purpose is, besides it's their belief system that they're being attacked. So they have to defend it. That's the only reason why, because we're telling them that they were lied to, and they're backing up the liars and mad at us. It's kind of like being mad at the person that helped you stop the robber, I mean, it's like, hey, I stopped the robber from broken your house, and then they get mad at you for doing it. So it's just kind of
Absolutely, brother. Now, you know what? I think a good way to end it, if you wanted to just kind of conclude everything, wrap everything up just wrap everything up neatly. Maybe say anything that you might have felt like you wanted to say and didn't get a chance to in regards to health. And as well, if anyone watching this has any specific questions regarding health, diet, supplements, that they didn't think of here or have a chance to ask, just email me or Matt, and we'll do our best to help you out and get you an answer. Go ahead there, Matt.
All right. Well, for those that want to think that the biblical model is wrong when it comes to creation, and then that we evolved to eat meat, and it's what made us who we are today, then I have a question for everybody to ponder tonight. We've been studying over 90,000 different Seventh-day Adventists for over 30 years, and guess what? They have the lowest heart disease and cause of cardiac mortality that there is. They're the vegans. The more meat that's added to the diet, the shorter lives people live. In fact, there's been 2 meta-analyses that have been done that demonstrated that vegans have less heart disease than meat eaters. Dr. Ornish showed and demonstrated through double randomized control studies and trials that you can actually reverse heart disease on a vegan diet. The rise of obesity is directly correlated with gut flora when humans removed plant fiber from their diet. You can actually look around and see from the studies that the more meat that's added into the diet, the shorter lives we live. So I definitely don't recommend it for your benefit. I gain nothing from saying any of this. Matter of fact, the book's going to be free. You can check it out. I have scientific PubMed studies on everything that's mentioned throughout it. Every herb, every supplement, everything that I'm saying is backed up. So I'm not telling you for any other reason. I'm not vegan because of animals. Like I would go hunting in a heartbeat. Doesn't mean anything to me. So I just say it because health is something that we only miss when it's gone. And I don't want you to have to get to that point. We're here to give you information to help better your life, help you understand it, and give purpose and reason to everything. The Bible is very clear that we were created to do a specific thing and that sin brought death into the world. And that's our model. And that's what I've created the system on. So I hope everyone was able to understand everything that was said in the interview, or else that would obviously not be a very good talk. And if you have any questions, I guess go to the comments section and I will put a link to the book in there for free.
Yes.
Hello, Dr. Stanford. First of all, I just want to thank you for having your talk. I'm involved in a fairly significant group and your work comes up quite often. My question is a bit of a two-parter. First, you stated that there was 700 billion new mutations per generation, correct? At a genome size of 3 billion, wouldn't we, for simplicity's sake, sticking with point mutations, have flipped every single mutation possible multiple times over?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
Basically every possible mutation that could happen in the genome has happened during our lifetime.
Great. And then you stated that most mutations are in the non-selection range. Wouldn't at some point you reach an equilibrium where the deleterious mutations flip and return to the previous state?
So flipping of back mutations are really rare. So you'd have your weight, basically the new mutations are flooding in, back mutations are exceedingly rare events, and so it'd be just as if there was no back. There is back mutation, but it wouldn't stem the tide.
Thank you.
I wonder whether I got that right. You're arguing that the baby differs from both parents by 100 nucleotides.
Yeah, 50 from each parent.
What is actually the experimental evidence for that? We do next generation sequencing and everything, so one could test that today. Is there evidence for that?
Yes, so I think most of the data is coming from parent-child trios, and so they're actually doing sequencing of parent and child, and so they actually can count the mutations. There are parts of the genome where they're not countable, like in tandem repeats and things, so they make some adjustment for that. But the 100 mutations per person per generation now is widely being circulated as the actual mutation rate. What fraction is neutral is debatable. Yes?
So have you ever considered a situation with some invertebrate species like horseshoe crabs that have been around for a long time into the geological record? How does a species like that continue to exist?
It's really a great question. Kondrashov actually talks about that. He said these lineages should have a lifespan limit. And so one author I didn't include was Dr. Fred Hoyle, a famous physicist. He actually was so interested in this that he spent a few years of his life looking at the mathematics of evolution. And he concluded DNA is degrading, and he said any given piece of DNA has a limited shelf life, basically. And so he envisioned aliens coming and reseeding the planet periodically to make up for all the degenerated genome. So really, it's hard to imagine deep time lineages surviving unchanged like the horseshoe crab. It's really a conceptual hurdle. And it's, I think, should be acknowledged widely that So one really interesting thing, jumping to the virus issue, is we watched the H1N1 virus go from a red-hot pandemic to a whimper, to an extinction event in 90 years. There's a paper recently published that say that all RNA viruses of all different families appear to be evolutionarily young, meaning tens of thousands of years old, whereas you'd think that viruses would date back to millions or billions of years ago. And so it's really interesting. The time element is something I don't want to deal with. I just want to deal with the present.
I'm wondering what your starting point is, because you're talking about genetic degeneration in humans. What is the point where you're starting from? Like, what's the point where, I'm just curious, because you have a continuity of humans coming from some ancestor that we wouldn't consider human. What is the point that you're starting from which
So the starting point, that's a good question. Basically, if we start with a population with 0 mutations, there is a burn-in time where it has to reach equilibrium, where it takes time for enough genetic diversity to build up in a 0 population, a 0 mutation population. And so there is a time where it's unrealistic, the degeneration rate is unrealistically high. And so we acknowledge that. But we could start anywhere. So we could start, let's suppose that all of the human beings in the world disappeared except the people in this room. We could start and say, okay, the average fitness in this room is 1. And then we're going to monitor fitness, not as reproduction, because that's a circular argument. We monitor fitness by function, like IQ or physical strength or things like, or longevity. Those things are a better way to measure it. But it's a great question, and it is a part of the formulation. We do start with mutations with 0. We start our populations with 0, and so that's a factor. But we can restart a population once you've reached equilibrium, a burn-in point, and we still see decline.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. I was just wondering, the mutational load is, as you say, is very high, but there's a lot of redundancy in the function of the human genome, and I'm just wondering if anybody has looked at it from that perspective, that there are similar functions. So maybe a particular mutation may take out one key gene, but there are redundant systems that can actually take over that function.
Yes, so that gets in a little bit into the philosophy element, because it looks to me, and a lot of people, like the genome is designed to be stabilized by things like diploidy, or things like gene family backups, or other types of redundancy. So redundancy does, in modern design, engineering design, we look at redundancy as a really good thing, and it is a good thing for our genome. And it's interesting because how do you evolve processes that only have long-term effects? Normally, selection can only act upon things are short. Beneficial mutations have normally a short-term vision of where they're going, so to speak. Yeah.
It's also kind of a two-part question. The first thing is about formulations from Fisher, right, and the early on population geneticists. So those are incredibly useful and formal, but they're also extremely simplistic. They assume, as you're assuming still, like 100 years later, that fitness is just one-dimensional feature, and that the function of selection is to increase fitness, when it's probably this multidimensional feature, and that the function of selection would be to maintain the ability to adapt, and not increase fitness. That's just the construct that was used mathematically to formalize this.
Right.
And this will lead to the second part, which is the equation should be, as was mentioned, for other species, correct? So for bacteria, for instance, and this has been studied, so this could be looked at. If your predictions are right, this should be observed in bacterial populations. They should collapse after a little bit of measurable amount of time in the lab because they go through a lot of generations and you can measure more accurately the distribution of mutations and the number of generations and even sequence everything and see the predictions. But that doesn't seem to happen.
Okay, those are all really good points. Let's see if I can remember what they were. The first one was oftentimes it's not about gain in fitness but adaptation.
Right.
I totally agree. Adaptive mutations are real. We can document them. They have value, but they don't necessarily increase net information. So I look at adaptation mutations mostly as fine-tuning systems. And so, in a sense, adaptations let a species remain the species because the species can accommodate changing environments. The second issue you brought up was multidimensional. I totally agree that the typical population genetics formulas are crazily oversimplified. The reason we went to numerical simulation is we call our numerical simulations comprehensive because we try to consider all the variables, and rather than just like a lot of in the past, numerical simulations only simulate some part of evolutionary process, or like let's say the rate of drift or the rate of and they often have simplifying assumptions like truncation selection or no environmental variance, things like that. So to do good numerical simulations, you have to consider like 30 parameters, and they're all adjustable. But you can look at a wide range of possibilities, but you realize that you can't reduce this to a formula. And so I agree with that. Your last point was?
Yeah, exactly that point. If you can't reduce it to a formula, you can't model realistic systems. And then when you look at systems like bacteria, where this is
bacteria.
Not happening, for instance.
Okay.
So I was talking about bacteria,
Yeah.
which
right.
relates
Okay,
to
so
that
the
point.
bacteria is also a good question. So I recently read a paper about reductive evolution in bacteria, and the long-term E. coli experiment also reflects this, is bacteria rapidly adapt to a new medium or a new environment. And that's really interesting. It's an adaptation. They're not gaining any new function. All those experiments usually actually involve reductive evolution. For example, all of the beneficial mutations in the long-term Lenski experiment were loss of function. Genes were deleted, genes were silenced, or genes were downregulated. So in one case, a promoter, which is normally regulated, became an unregulated promoter. But all that is adaptive fine-tuning. There was no new information being created. And in fact, technically, as the bacteria jettisons unnecessary genes for that environment, they are actually painting themselves into a corner. They won't be able to survive in any other environment. So they become handicapped in a sense. So there's another paper on reductive evolution in bacteria where they say, they were looking at a specific bacteria. They said 1/3 of all random deletions increased fitness. It has to do with getting rid of any genes that aren't necessary for the moment. It's very short term. The bacteria, it works for them short term, but then when they need those genes that they've jettisoned, they don't have them. So that's even that, in my opinion, that type of adaptation is entropic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for such a provocative talk where you give us the thesis that according to current biological paradigms, we don't exist. But my question is so much of that thesis hinges on a simple piece of evidence that we don't have a normal distribution of deleterious and beneficial mutations. And my question really is, how can we empirically test this when we can only look to the past and present and we actually don't know the future of mutations?
A number of geneticists have tried to quantitate the actual distribution of mutations. It's actually hard to quantify the near neutrals because they're so neutral that you can't see the effect. And so there is a certain amount of assumption there. Let's see, lost my train of thought. Your question was, how can we know the distribution of mutations?
Sure.
And so Lenski's experiment is really interesting because they were periodically sequencing the population as it changed, they could actually determine exactly, and they could determine when mutations arose. They could see which mutations were beneficial. Only a tiny fraction were beneficial, and they were all reductive. So that's a quantitative thing. Also, we did a research on the influenza virus. So Rob Carter and I, turns out that over the last 70 years or so, medical people have been freezing influenza samples. And then all those samples through history were sequenced. So we have this historical sequence, kind of like the Lenski situation, but with influenza. And what we see is that, well, actually, let me just show a slide here. This is our numerical simulation. Mutation goes up perfectly linearly, and fitness goes down with a fitness decline curve. And this is the influenza study that we did. Rob gathered sequence data going back to the 30s, and what he sees is a strict linear accumulation, just in the same way. So basically, it's clock-like. 10% of the H1N1 influenza virus mutated. And so this is genetic entropy at work, and it's supported by other people who have been following H1N1's virulence, and they show that the decline since again records were being kept, or actually since the 1918 influenza, is that the virulence declined in the same type of way that that we see in our simulations, to the point where in 2009 that human version of H1N1, there's still H1N1 circulating that's swine flu, but H1N1 went extinct in 2009. So that's clearly indicating that this is not neutral or adaptive. This is genetic entropy at work in a biological system where we can measure what's going on. There were mutations, by the way, there was some adaptation. There were some beneficial mutations happening, but it wasn't enough to stop extinction. And these two other curves were two other influenza outbreaks, and they similarly underwent entropic decay. They didn't go extinct yet, but they're clearly headed that way. So we do have some biological data.
Okay. Well, thank you.
It's true that it's largely theoretical, but there's now growing biological data.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you showing up, and I know I've taken too much time. I have a few books that I'm happy to share with you, one genetic entropy and one on contested bones. If you think you're going to read it, you're welcome to a copy. The BINP, Biological Information, New Perspectives, that proceedings is in the NIH library, and you can. But you don't want to read that proceedings. It would take you a few months. It's 25 really long papers, very technical, on all the different dimensions to biological information. But there's like a synopsis you can read in a few hours, which is freely available at BINP.org. It stands for Biological Information New Perspectives.org. And there you can download the synopsis for free. So if that interests you, that's available. But thank you so much for your patience.
Mutation rates. The mutation rate per generation is an observable fact. This is not open for debate. In humans, the rate is anywhere between 63.2 and 238 new mutations per generation. The factors that make the largest impact on mutation inheritance are the age of the parents. The older the parents, the more mutations get passed down to offspring. The mutation rate of 63 comes from a Greenland trio study of 78 Icelandic parents. They discovered that parental mutations are doubling every 16.5 years, meaning that if you wait till you're 36 before you have your first child, you will have accumulated double the mutations from when you were 20, which have the potential to be passed on to your offspring. This occurs because 3/4 of the human germline mutation are paternal in origin, and their total number increases with a father's age at conception. Regardless, the clock is constant and consistent. Thus, it becomes a great tool for making testable and falsifiable predictions with, And this is exactly what young Earth creationist Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has done. He has multiple mitochondrial DNA rate predictions, all of which have been validated. It is logical to conclude then that going back in time, in reverse, you end at a point where there are no mutations. 0. Which begins with biblical Adam and Eve. And guess what? The first study results ever done in 1997 confirmed this, and they obtained a time of 6,500 years ago for mitochondrial Eve, using the observable rates. That's only 327 generations ago, and this was secular scientists that discovered this, not creationists. Then, using creationist methods, we assumed that Adam and Eve lived around 300 generations ago. If this was true, then using 63.2 mutations per generation, the lowest end of the spectrum for evolutionary benefits, the average human then should have 18,000 mutations built up, if this was correct. Well, guess what? Results confirmed 18,900 mutations on average, confirming Y chromosome Adam could not have lived more than 345 generations ago. So again, this compounding mutation rate is not a guess, it's a fact. This is obvious to anyone who studies biology because this is exactly how they create molecular clocks in the first place. So to think mutations are not compounding in all life is just nonsensical and flat out wrong. The inherited mutation accumulation happens to every species on Earth, and it's how we create these clocks. We are able to see the inherited mutational load per generation accumulating in all species we have ever tested. The fact of the matter is, those species may have different rates by which these clocks tick, based on a variety of factors like lifespan, reproduction age, etc. All of the results undermine the evolutionary timeline and theory of old age, as all of the observational rates are an order of magnitude higher than their assumption-based phylogenetic methods. Some are even up to 100 times faster. So, when we count up these de novo germline mutations, the numbers do not look good for evolution in any way. Not only this, many people still are under the impression that these de novo mutations are neutral and have no effect on the system whatsoever, but they couldn't be more wrong. They just don't get noticed by the system, so they are not selected for and removed. Thus, they build up, and we are able to make these clocks. But when you investigate many of these de novo mutations, they cause disease. So they are not neutral. They are near neutral, having small, slightly deleterious effects that the body cannot remove them because it cannot see them. And this is the problem for humans and all life on Earth that we have to deal with.